Hi, good morning, afternoon, or evening. I have a proposal. I think a unit about early Scandinavian civilization would be an interesting topic to cover in this class's curriculum. I think this for quite a few reasons, so let me get started. One reason I think covering Norse civilization would be an interesting unit is that it allows students to understand and contemplate how biased sources affect our perception of a people. When looking at the Norse, it's difficult to view them only using primary sources, mainly because they barely wrote anything down. Though they did have a runic alphabet, it really wasn't used to write down long stories or events. Instead, they used it to write down things like names or traded items. They really passed most information verbally. They enjoyed telling stories rather than reading them. So most of our information either comes from the people they fought or the people who traveled to Scandinavia. This is where biases come into play. People who were the victims of Viking attacks probably didn't write about how nice they were or how interesting their lives were. This is likely why many have the perception of Vikings as simple bloodthirsty killers. And while that may not be entirely inaccurate, it doesn't nearly paint a full picture of who they actually were as people. The other information historians have gathered about Norse civilization comes from those who have visited Scandinavia. These people usually had ulterior motives besides simply documenting their way of life, namely the Christian scholars who wrote about the Norse people mainly as a form of propaganda. Take the story of Rollo of Normandy, for example, where as far as we know historically, he was a Viking who became the founder of Normandy after making deals with the Christian king, King Charles III. However, later Christian writers embellished his story, depicting him as a savage pagan Viking who found God and became a paragon of Christian values and brought law and order. Even practically all of our knowledge about Norse mythology, the Poetic and Prose Edda, is written by Christian writers hundreds of years after the Viking Age. Why did so many Christians write about Old Norse myths and stories? Well, there's two main reasons. One was that it made it easier to rally against the Vikings when they were portrayed as monsters. The second being that it helped convert the Norse people to Christianity. These writers often fused Norse stories with their own to help spread their message and create something like a state religion. Another reason I think early Scandinavian civilization should be covered in this class is how widespread its influence grew, even impacting Canada. And to talk about this, I'm going to give a little bit of history. So there are basically three things Vikings are mainly known for: being great fighters, being great sailors, and being great craftsmen. And that's where this all really begins. As they are both great sailors and craftsmen, they invented the Drakkar, seen here in the Osberg ship, a well-preserved Viking vessel. The Drakkar was a ship that allowed Vikings to sail at fast speeds in a variety of weather and water conditions. This allowed the Vikings to create large and expansive trade networks, from Russia to Constantinople and Persia. They also set up various trading villages in Scandinavia, where merchants from across the world would come to trade. As these trading posts grew, it allowed the Norse to specialize in various occupations, like the arts, crafts, metalworking, pottery, and even more. Oh yeah, and this is an ancient civilization that actually has something to do with Canada, unlike all the other civilizations covered in this class. Leif Erikson is known as the first European to reach North America. He explored what is now eastern Canada, from the Arctic to New Brunswick. And unlike all the other Europeans that came to North America, they were actually quite peaceful and respectful of the indigenous people, and simply traded and set up a few villages. This could definitely start some interesting dialogue between students, and maybe even spark a few test questions. Wink wink. Finally, here are a few reasons why I think this would be a popular unit for students. One thing I think the Norse did better than any other civilization we've covered in this class is party and have fun. Unlike other cultures who were always fighting and debating philosophical ideas, the Vikings most of the time just celebrated festivals with their families. They played board games like the Hnufflefluff and threw axes around. Even their governing system was just a big party, and they didn't even bother naming it. They just called it the thing, and I think that would be something students will enjoy learning about. One of the most popular topics for students when learning about various ancient civilizations seems to be mythology, and the Norse had one of the most interesting and known ancient religions. I'd say it ranks right below Greek mythology. Most students know at least a couple of gods, which is more than I can say about Mesopotamia or ancient China. Like if you ask students who these two characters were, I'd say at least 70% could tell you. Speaking of that, Norse culture is one of the most well-represented ancient cultures in media. Considering how many games, movies, TV shows, and books have been made about the Norse, this gives students the opportunity to explore this culture like no other in the course, besides maybe Greece and Egypt, which happen to be the most popular units. So that's why I think Norse civilization should be added to this class's curriculum. And I'm not saying it should replace another unit like Mesopotamia, for example, but it should. Thank you for listening.